Events. What are they? We've mentioned events in the past. I even said how learning about functions and event triggers will change the way you create websites. That's because they add a new level of interactivity to your pages. An event is something that happens when an action is taken on a web page. We have a few to go through. We have on-click, double-click, focus, blur, mouse down, mouse up, mouse move, mouse out, mouse over, key down, key press, and on key up. Some of these are pretty similar to each other, but there are little differences, and each event has its own use. Events, so all of these in this list here, are global attributes that can be applied to almost any HTML element. How do we apply them? Just like every other attribute, where type is the attribute and button is the value. In our example here, onClick would be the attribute, and in here would be our function. It would have to be a JavaScript function, of course, and all events are written like this. Now, the attribute is not case sensitive because it's HTML. However, the value, which is JavaScript, that is case sensitive. Where if we look for function with the lowercase f, it's not the same thing as function with an uppercase f. So let's look at our first event, that's the onClick. And this event is the one that will take place when you or the user clicks the element. So what we have is function name, and all it's going to do is alert us with Caleb. That's my name. And then in the body, we have just a regular span element. OnClick is the attribute, and our value is our function name. So as a span, it's not going to change the way the mouse looks. So when I put my mouse over it, it looks like it's not clickable at all. But what happens when I click it? It runs the function of name, which alerts Caleb. On double click, this is pretty much the same thing as on click, only you have to click the element twice and fairly quick. So as an example here, we just have function double click. We have a parameter. In here is our parameter, and we just pass it into here, so it's going to alert us with my custom text. The attribute is on double click, and you notice I can keep clicking it like this, nothing's going to happen. I have to click it twice pretty fast for it to actually activate. There we go, I double clicked it, and function double click, my custom text, which was the parameter, has now alerted us. With text areas, we're given a couple different options when it comes to text areas or an input field. The first one is on focus. When a web page has a text field, and you or another user clicks the field and starts typing, they're focusing on that field. As soon as they click inside of it and you are allowed to type, you are focusing on it. Here's an example of how they work when we focus on them. We have an input element, on focus is our attribute, and start focus is our value. Remember, the event value is supposed to be a JavaScript function. Doesn't always have to be, but just to keep things simple, that's what we're sticking with. Start focus is our function name, matches down here, including the brackets. And when we focus on it, it should run this function, which will then run this code, like so. It now says that we are focused. So when I click in here, it's going to alert us with you are focused. And that's exactly what it did. Now, the opposite of on focus is on blur, and that's when you click outside of a text area. When you become unfocused on something, you are blurring away from it. Kind of like your eyesight. When you focus on something, you're trying to see it. When you're really not focusing, something far in the distance could get blurry. Attribute is on blur. Value is our function name, start blur. And it will alert us you are leaving the field, /n, that's new line in JavaScript, blurred. So I click in, nothing happens. I can type stuff, nothing happens. I click out, and it activates. That's because we blurred away from the field. Remember, blur is the opposite of focus. I also want to let you know that you can have more than one event. So here we have on double click, on focus, and on blur. All we have to do is throw in a few JavaScript functions, and all three of them will work. On top of clicking events and focus and blur events, we also have mouse events. This includes moving your mouse over an element, out of an element, clicking the mouse down, and releasing the mouse button, as well as movement. The first one to go over is on mouse over. We can call a JavaScript function when we put our mouse over an element. So here all I did was style it so you know exactly what we're looking at. I'm going to remove this just to make this code a little bit cleaner for you. On mouse over is the attribute, and when we put our mouse over it, is going to activate the mouse over function. All that's going to do is alert us with my mouse is over the element, like this. Notice how my mouse isn't over it yet? And as soon as I put my mouse inside that element, it alerts us. Now once the mouse is in there, we can move around all we like. We can even move our mouse out, but once we put our mouse back in, it's going to alert us again, and it's going to continuously do this. And all we did was simply move our mouse over the element, and it triggered our function. Next we have onMouseOut. This is the blur of onMouseOver. Basically, from up here, when we move our mouse out, that is the onMouseOut event. Now I didn't give you an example for this one, it's pretty much the same thing, only the attribute is different. So instead of onMouseOver, we have onMouseOut. And then we would just, put our function in here. Next we have onMouseDown, and there is a subtle difference between onClick and onMouseDown. OnClick is the full clicking action, that's clicking down and releasing your mouse. Where onMouseDown is when you click down, but it's before you release the mouse button. I'm just going to click down, I'm not going to release. And it prompts us. Now, I'm still holding the mouse down. If I let go, nothing happens. Then we have onMouseUp. OnMouseUp is the other end of onMouseDown. This is when you release the mouse button. So just to go over this, click is onMouseDown plus onMouseUp. So that's the full clicking action. OnMouseDown is when you click the mouse down but you don't release it yet, and onMouseUp is when you unclick it, releasing the mouse. Now one more for mouse events, and this is onMouseMove. And this is when you move your mouse on top of an element, and the event is triggered only when the mouse is moved. So again, we don't need to see the styling, I just wrote that so you know exactly how I did the example below. OnMouseMove is our attribute, and you'll notice that I'll type up here OnMouseMove in camel case, and down here it's all lowercase. That's because with my HTML I try to keep everything lowercase. It's a better HTML standard. So basically what this is saying is when we move our mouse anywhere inside this element, it's going to activate the MoveMe function. Well, that's right here, and it's just going to alert us with moved. So I move my mouse all the way around here. Nothing's going to happen. See what happens when I move it over. Okay, well it alerted us, so I'm going to keep moving my mouse, and it's going to keep alerting us. Now I move my mouse outside of it, I hit enter, it stops alerting us. That's because our mouse is no longer in there. Now to really slam you full of information, we also have keyboard events. These are onKeyPress, onKeyDown, and onKeyUp. OnKeyPress is like onClick, only it's for your keyboard. This is the full action of pressing and releasing a key on your keyboard. So what we have is an input onKeyPress, and that's our attribute. Our value, remember, is always our JavaScript function. So afterPress matches with afterPress. And this says when we press a key, it's going to alert us with key pressed. Now I can click in, I click out, click in and click out. Nothing's going to happen until I press a key. Every time I press a key, I'm going to be alerted with pressed key. To the exception of a backspace. Also quickly, placeholder is another attribute that you can use in text fields such as this one. Whatever you type in here is going to show up in here. To the exception of Internet Explorer, it works in every other browser, and it will stay in there until you type something. And now once I remove it, if there's nothing in there, it's going to hold that place with whatever I typed as the value. Next we have onKeyDown, and this is like onMouseDown. The specified function will run when you press the key down, regardless of whether or not the key was released. So remember, onKeyPress is to press a key down and up. This is just pressing it down, and this will activate a function. OnKeyUp is the opposite of that. So when you press down, nothing will happen. When you release the key, that's when your function is activated. Often, a lot of these won't actually be used. You'll find that a few of these are pretty popular and more popular than other events. For example, onKeyUp, you'd probably just use onKeyPress. But with these, you can now add a new layer of interactivity to your websites. When a viewer clicks, moves, focuses, blurs, or types anything in a page, you can now activate function. And this allows the user to engage with your website, to have a reaction when they act on something. When they click a button, they're acting on your website is then going to react. It's going to act back to them. And users nowadays, Love this. This is the best way to create a website because it's not just a flat page anymore with some text and some color and a few images. Now it's interactive. Now people, when they click something or when they hover their mouse over something, then they're actually taking action on that website. Or I guess on your website. This will make them want to stay on your website longer, and that's essentially the goal, is for them to spend as much time on your website as possible.